This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today. It's the year-end awards, Duane. It's today we're giving out some trophies. Maybe they're not real trophies, they're audio trophies, but they're trophies nonetheless. And it's our last show of 2017.
It is our last show of 2017. Last year at this time, we were saying FU 2016, and things only really got worse, except for one notable thing, which is related to this show. It's been a pretty good year for me in terms of the world of soccer. So
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm wondering what you're talking about. 2017, and yeah. Oh, yeah, the team of the year in 2017. You're talking about Canada U19 basketball, right?
Yeah. Look, I don't want to quote unquote crap on someone's parade as someone from Montreal accused me of doing when they were just really being anti-TFC. But if you really look objectively at what TFC did this year, there is really no argument that they weren't the team of the year within Canada, other than the fact that they don't play universally Canadian players or even a majority of Canadian players. So that is something I do get, but There's no criteria within that Canadian Press Award that says that has to be the case. And the Montreal Expos won it 3 years in a row at one point. So, come on.
I know. Soccer hasn't made it apparently in Canada, but let's start. We have a few categories, so those categories we'll go by categories. Usually we do it by team, and it makes for like a segment on TFC, a segment on Montreal, and a segment on Vancouver, and a segment on the league. That's not what we want to do. We don't want to talk about just teams. Talk about conversation. Talk about most disappointing, most improved, most underrated MVP. So we will go by category this year, Duane. And let's start with the negative, because we'll finish with positive. Let's start with the most disappointing disappointing team in Canada in soccer in 2017, which is the Montreal Impact. So in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion, Duane, the most disappointing player for the 2017 Montreal Impact has to be Matteo Mancosu. Coming off an amazing season in 2016 where he took Didier Drogba's job, pushed this team further in the playoff than expected, performed well. Well, in 2017, he did not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's probably the correct choice, other than someone that wants to say the whole team, which is also maybe a fair choice.
Which is probably fair. Yeah.
Yeah. Or you could say something, go outside the box and say like Patrice Bernier not getting a proper send-off. And if you hear background noise, I'm at the Oshawa train station, so forgive me on that. But it was not a great year for Montreal, and there were a lot of candidates for this one. This reminds me a little bit of TFC's battle days when you could have named about 17 players for most disappointing. But certainly I think that. A lot's got to change in the off season for Montreal, and I think we're already sort of seeing the fallout of that, and a good choice there for sure.
All right, now with Vancouver, Duane, your most disappointing player in 2017 for the Whitecaps.
I didn't go with a player, and I'm going to tell you why. Because again, the Whitecaps have a lot of disappointments going this year. They didn't have they did okay in the regular season. They weren't quite as bad as Montreal for sure. They did make the playoffs. They just didn't really have much when they got there. Maybe their attack in general, Montero could be a candidate for that. But I went outside the box and I said that the most disappointing aspect of the Vancouver Whitecaps is Bobby Lenarduzzi. And the reason I say that is because it's becoming increasingly evident to me that it's time for new thought processes, new management to come in there and direct this club in a slightly different way. And Bobby's been around a long time, and I don't want to just diminish what he's done for the game in Vancouver or what he's done over his career, but there comes a time for everyone where they need a fresh start. And a club needs a fresh set of eyes to steer them into a direction. I don't think that as long as Bobby is steering the ship, that this is a club that's ever going to get over this sort of mid-lane hump. And I don't think it's unfair of me or me being Toronto-centric or me being Vancouver-hating or whatever to say that the Whitecaps are mid-lane right now. That's exactly what they are. They're not bad, but they're not good either. And I just don't see them getting out of it unless there's maybe a fresh sort of direction. You look at, not to compare them to TFC, but TFC are the champions, so you want to be compared to the champions.
Not to compare them to TFC, but I'm going to compare them to TFC.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm going to compare them to the champions of Major League Soccer, which is what they're aspiring to be, right? I mean, you may not like that, but they are.
Am I going to have to
needed a
endure
fresh-
this for a year? You're saying the champions of the league? Am I going to have to deal with this for like 12 months?
Champione, ole, yeah, pretty much. I can envision that's probably going to be something that's said a little bit, but nonetheless, look, they needed a fresh set of eyes about 4 years ago when that flip happened. I mean, they needed a lot of fresh sets of eyes, and once you get that fresh set of eyes, you need to give them the time to build it. But Bobby at this point and the management team at this point in Vancouver has had plenty of time to try and take this over the hump, and they're spinning their wheels. Again, not bad, but not good either. And so that's why my disappointment is Bobby.
Especially when you look at next year, where the increase of money invested in the TAM players, which literally means you need to invest more in your roster as a club to take advantage of the opportunities to invest more for TAM players, which means you have more than 3 DPs, basically. And for that to happen, you need to have the will of the front office to spend money on rosters. So with that new addition next year, we'll see if it changes how Vancouver does things. But Vancouver were always a bit shy, always a bit gun-shy of pulling the trigger of spending money on players.
Precisely. All right. Quickly before I move to TFC, I did want to make a note for those that are wondering. We're going to look at Ottawa and Edmonton and the sort of general D2 on a special show next week that's going to sort of review that, and the women's world of soccer as well. We're going to take a special show next week as well. We'll get some guests in to have a more in-depth conversation to review them. So this show is really focusing on TFC, Vancouver, and the Montreal Impact, and as along with the Canadian U.S. national teams and the overall MLS League and the overall world of men's football. That's what today is going to be about. So we're not forgetting the rest of this world. We just have a lot of stuff that we have to look at, so it made sense to sort of split it up a little bit. So don't yell at us. We're going to get to the other stuff too. But shall we move to TFC now?
Let's move to TFC. I'm wondering, Duane, who do you have after a season of all dreams, after a season where all expectations were fulfilled? Was there an issue, something that was disappointing in 2017 for Toronto FC?
Yeah, this one I had to think about. I'm not going to lie. But what I did came up with, and I feel guilty a little bit doing this because I won't say it again. But, it was a very good season. There weren't a lot of candidates for this. But the one I came up with is more of a disappointing around circumstance and a disappointing around his play and his development. It's Nick Hagelin. Nick Hagelin was a breakout in 2016, and it was really, a godsend in that second half of the season. It was a really key component to their playoff run. Scored the huge goal that sent the Montreal series into the extra time, right? So he was just a great player for them in 2016, and he started this season as maybe one of the better defenders, not just on FC, but in the league as a whole in the first half of the year. But then the injuries caught up to him, and he never really was able to recapture that form, and it's put him behind it, and now he's going to have to struggle to get his job back. This is he's a good guy. Like, he's always the first out in the charity events. He's just a nice man, like a good person that you want to cheer for. And it was disappointing very much to see him struggle with those injuries. And even if you're not a TFC fan, you've got to sort of, feel a little bit for a guy like that really did sort of overcome odds to get to where he did and sort of start to excel after we were sort of given up with him. And then he gets this other setback this year and then immediately comes back and has another setback from that. So I'm going to say Nick Hagelin and his injury problems in the second half of the season is TFC's disappointment of the year.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense too, and I would maybe add on my side my disappointment for Toronto FC in 2017, and it's hard to kind of talk about a disappointment when the team won everything they've participated in 2017 is the amount of Canadian content. I'm not saying this to put some rain on the parade. No. I'm just saying the earlier generation of an Ashton Morgan, that type of Canadian content is falling a bit out of form and out of favor with the club. You have the new generation, the Jordan Hamilton coming up, but you still have maybe a little gap here where Osario's Edwards, Jay Chapman too,
yeah,
right? In the same category as an Ashton Morgan, maybe.
Yeah, look, no,
more Hamilton.
Ashton scored a goal this year, and I'm happy for them. Every year we always anticipate that Ashton's going to move on eventually, but he keeps sticking around. It's because he's a left back, and they're hard to find. But Yeah, no, for sure. There, and it goes beyond the first team. There is, in my mind, a bit of a turning away from some previous philosophies in terms of how they handle their academy, how they handle the USL team. They're signing non-Canadians into those roles now, which in the past they wouldn't have done. And as someone who has criticized other MLS teams in the past for doing that, I'm not gonna not criticize TFC for that. I understand why they're doing it, and I understand why the other teams didn't do it too. And I do wish and think that it's important for all three Canadian MLS teams to try when all things being equal to sign a Canadian. I believe that very strongly.
Yeah, let's explain why now in the USL, a team like Toronto FC are surrounding their young prospect with maybe a little bit older players as well. Is you don't want to have 18 prospects in your USL roster. What I mean is you want to focus maybe to 7 and surround those 7 highly touted prospects with veterans, with mentors, with quote-unquote player coaches, with Reggie Dunlops. Put a team of half of Reggie Dunlops and half of prospects. Those prospects will learn and soak up all they can from those veteran presence. And I think that's the model. That's the hybrid model that we're going to see this year in USL MLS2 reserves team with TFC2 as an example.
Yeah, and look, I think that there's an in-between there, too. They don't have to be 30-year-olds. They don't have to be 35-year-olds. They could be 24-year-olds that have played a few years in pro, or 26-year-olds, right? And I think there's some value to that. I was at an AHL game last night. I watched the Belleville Senators play the Laval
the Rockets. It's not the Comets, but it's the Rockets. I'll take it.
Yeah, the Rockets won 4-3. And there were, I'm looking at that roster, and I was like looking at the players, and there's AHL lifers there that sort of supplement a roster and sort of help the young players. And Belleville's really struggling this year, the Senators farm team. And when I look at them objectively, it's because their defensive core, the average age is like 20. Of course, a 20-year-old defenseman is going to get killed in the AHL because there's a lot of veteran savvy out there. So you kind of need to mix up a little bit to help those guys out, because I'm not too sure constantly losing is helpful to development. And for sure, you can sort of mix that up a little bit. You saw with TFC, they re-signed Uccello previously, and he's a guy in the past that maybe they would have let go. He's a Canadian player that's been in the USL team for 3 seasons now. Doesn't look like he's going to break into the first team, but they've re-signed him to another contract, which suggests to me that they sort of understand the value of having guys that consistently play in the USL, and it's maybe not even, in the sense that they look at him as a long-term fix or a long-term prospect at all anymore. They might just look at him as a guy that's going to play another 3 or 4 seasons in the USL and help the next generation learn how to play in that league, and hopefully 1 or 2 of those guys will raise up and make a first team down the line. So yeah, for sure, that's I think something that needs to happen. We talked a little bit more about this yesterday too, if you want to go back to the archives and listen to that.
Now let's move to the Canadian men's national team, the most disappointing aspect, player, performance of the Canadian men's national team in 2017, Duane. Who do you have?
I'm going to say just the fact that Atiba didn't play at the Gold Cup would be my most disappointing aspect of the season this year.
Yeah, didn't you know he's not good enough for us? Like, it's fine if you captain your club in the Champions League, but you're not good enough for Canada, you know that?
Well, he
Player of the year didn't play in the Gold Cup.
Yeah, and I wonder what it would have made. And I thought about this time, and I thought it was unfortunate that, and I had to get from Atiba's perspective why he maybe decided to sit that one out. But to me, I looked at it as, a chance. And look at the way Canada played, too, having a strong performance, very close to maybe making a semifinal again. Had Atiba been on that lineup, you never know. Maybe they take that extra step. Maybe they manage to get past Jamaica and go deeper into that tournament, and that would have been something that would have been great for his career and great for him to cap it off. He hasn't retired from internationally officially, and has even made some hints that he's going to come back next summer. I don't know why he would. There's nothing really to play for, but nonetheless,
if he's already in the country, Duane, it's not that big of a stretch to just take the plane for a few hours and represent your country. That goes with the rumors that started last week that maybe Atiba's, or maybe there's an interest in a few Canadian cities for Atiba, like where I am presently, Montreal. So we'll see if it happens. But I agree.
We've said before that Montreal would be a good fit for him. I'm not sure he would fit neither of the other two right now. I don't think Vancouver wants to pay him the money, and I'm not too sure. Well, I know he wouldn't fit in Toronto. I don't think Atiba is going to come to back up Michael Bradley. So there you go.
I have an idea in my mind for the last few days, like Piatti on the left, Zamali in 10. You got some player playing right midfield. Then you have Atiba behind Zamali and Donadel and Piet behind Atiba. Sounds like a great midfield in my mind.
Fair enough. It does sound like a decent midfield for sure. Going to need to figure out who's going to play in the center of your defense back there in Montreal. But we got a couple months yet.
Yeah, a couple months.
Just play with all fullbacks. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. The room's not burning. My most disappointing performance for the Canadian men's national team in 2017 is Kyle Larin being upstaged by a 16-year-old at the Gold Cup. You never really see that happen before. And my mind is, can he stop missing sitters already when he's wearing a red shirt? Like, it's not just one, it's not just two. It's not talking about like 3 or 4 over the last 2 years. And when you playing as a striker for your national team, you kind of have to bury 50% of your chances because you're not going to get a lot of chances. And you have to be more clinical. The lack of clinical finish for Kyle Larin, not just in 2017, in general when he's wearing the Canada shirt, but this is one of my disappointing performances. It could have been even better if Larin put a few pass keepers.
Well, yeah, and certainly the way that he performed in that game against Jamaica would have to be something that people would get in their claw and be upset about, because it begs the question, why bring him in? And at that point, they were humming along, doing pretty well, having their best Gold Cup in quite a while.
And we didn't even talk about the DUI here. I was just talking about that game that he played against Jamaica, right?
Yeah, well, that'd be more of a disappointment for Orlando too. So that's, yeah. Kyle Larin could be in a line for most disappointing season. In fact, maybe I might name him as most disappointing season in MLS as a whole, because he just, he didn't really take another step this year, and you have the DUI. In fact, I'm going to name him as the most disappointing overall MLS player right now as I'm thinking about it out loud. He didn't take the next step. I mean, he did have a bad season by any means, but certainly we sort of wanted him to just get better and better and better. And now that he's, perhaps going to Besiktas, and you hope that happens, and hope that he can take that as an opportunity to grasp it and move forward and play in a team that's playing in the Champions League. But we're not as excited as we were a year ago about what his long-term prospects are. And I think that has a lot to do with a lot of different things, including the off-the-field things. So yes, you didn't ask me, but that is who I'm going to name as my most disappointment player MLS-wide this year.
The U.S. men's national team, where to start? The most disappointing aspect of the U.S. men's national team in 2017, the year they did not make the World Cup. Bruce Arena?
Yeah.
I'll go with Bruce Arena.
I was going to go Bruce Arena as well, because it didn't make the cultural change didn't happen that needed to happen. There wasn't enough to, a lot of people are going to point to Bradley and going to point to Josie. I don't know why they point to Josie. Like, I'll get there in a minute. That Bradley, I get it, because this is why it's Arena to me. Because, I think the reason Bradley looks so poor in those games is because he was put in a position to look poor. And I think that is incumbent upon the management, the manager, to figure out what formation best fits your players. And you have a player, Michael Bradley, that looks so dominant in Major League Soccer, albeit this, I don't know if the level is lower than you're playing in CONCACAF internationally. So he looks so dominant at that level, but doesn't at the national team. And it's because of the way they're using him in my mind. And for all of the complaints about Klinsmann's tactical abilities, and there are a lot of legitimate complaints there, when Arena came in, he didn't really do anything other than sort of play basic LA Galaxy 1.0 ball, and the talent was going to win out in the end. And so, yeah, Bruce Arena is a good pick for most disappointment for the U.S. men's national team this year, because I think he overall just didn't get the talent in the right places at the right time.
No, exactly. And he had one job, basically, when he took over for Klinsmann, is to right the ship and make sure it didn't sink. Well, it sunk. So that's a disappointment.
There you go. Yeah, when you miss, there's a lot of disappointment to go around when you fail to make the World Cup from the position of strength that the U.S. has.
MLS league-wide, you already mentioned your most disappointing is Kyle Larin. And off the top of my head, I don't find another situation as disappointing as a player with coming into this season, which technically was supposed to be his best MLS season, probably his last, and you're supposed to make a last impression last, and it didn't. This year was not as successful for both Orlando, for both Kyle Larin. There's other reason behind the lack of success in Orlando, but Kyle Larin's lack of production is one of them. league-wide, I have to agree with you. At least in our perspective, which is a bit biased by Canada, Kel Larin is the most disappointing player in Major League Soccer.
Fair enough. All right, yeah. So we've already talked about that. So
Worldwide.
I guess there's not much more.
Worldwide. Mr. Worldwide.
Oh, this disappointment worldwide. I didn't prepare this one, so off the top of my head, yeah. How about Mourinho?
Sure.
Name of coaches here.
That works. That works.
Just, the way that he's continuing, like the amount of money, like the United fans, and okay, I'm good at my bias. It's going to show here. They like to knock City for the money they spent. You know how much more net transfer spending that City had than United this year? £2 million.
Yeah.
They're both astronomically insane. So if you're going to spend that much money, at least be doing what City's doing. And Mourinho has this team not only not competing for the title, although when you objectively look at it, they're not terrible by any means. They're second place in the Premier League, and they're in the round of the final 16 of the Champions League. It's not like they're crap in the bed, but they're not playing pretty. Yeah. With the amount of talent, and they have great attacking talent at United. The Rashford's an exciting talent there.
Pogba
young talent.
And Lukaku.
Pogba, but they still play this negative, horrible football, and there's a lot. And he's such a hateable man. He used to be kind of like a fun villain. He was like he used
to be happy. He used to be happy-go-lucky, but his last spell at Chelsea, I think, destroyed his soul. And I think now he doesn't have a soul anymore. And you can see when he's talking that it just doesn't register. There's like a disconnect with reality.
Yeah, he used to be like kind of an anti-hero. He was like, Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was Ric Flair. But now he's just
Hulk Hogan.
Name a wrestler that's awful. It's
Hulk
just plain
Hogan.
awful. I don't.
Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Hollywood Marino.
There you go. Yeah, just terrible.
Let's move. Go ahead.
Okay,
I was just going to move on.
Each other again.
Yeah, exactly. So most improved for 2017. Let's start with Montreal because it's pretty much the only positive thing that happened in Montreal in the world of soccer in 2017, and that's Anthony Jackson and Duane. 11 start, 9 goals, 21 caps this year for Montreal. Had to work really hard for every single playing minutes he had, but he made the most of it. Most improved player for the Montreal Impact, not just on the pitch, off the pitch, how he treats his life as a professional athlete, how he nourishes his body, how he trains his body, his mind, his confidence, how he trains his visualization aspect of his game, where he knows when he's taking the pitch he wants to score, and he knows he can score from almost any position that he finds himself in. And that's the type of attitude you need as a striker to be good. You kind of have to have an ego. You kind of have to have a big one. And you kind of have to think that you're better than everybody else to be able to be better than everybody else. As a striker, especially for me, most improved, Anthony Jackson and Mel.
Yeah, Montreal. There's an obvious choice there. We'll get there in a minute, but obviously he had 12 goals. Was it 12 goals? How many goals did he have? It was outrageous how many goals he had.
9 in Canada, 9 in Montreal, but he scored a few for Canada this year too.
Yeah, so great year. And if there was a category for like best story or most unexpected story, he'd win it hands down as well. And he's got to be in the the conversation for most improved in the league too. We'll see what we have when we get there. But yeah, there's no argument there. That's the choice, and I don't think anyone can really disagree with it. So message us, but I think that's a pretty clear choice.
And now for Vancouver, most improved player.
This was a bit weird for me. I have Breck Shea, and it's because he dipped so far. He was like the most disappointment for a couple of years in a row league-wide. Really was. And then this year he goes to Vancouver. We're all kind of laughing, ha, 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 what's this going to do? And then he was pretty good. He was pretty good for them. He was pretty dangerous for them at times.
The few times that Robinson used him as a striker, like, what is he? Oh, wait, it's actually working. He's tall. He can head the ball in the box. Wait, this is a good idea.
So he kind of got some of his form back. And I mean, it's kind of weird that you're going to pick a player for most improved that's dipped low so that they're getting back to where you expect them. But, I think maybe we need to recognize that too. So Breck Shea's my pick there.
No argument on my side. I have to agree with you. And it was kind of fun to see too the evolution of Breck Shea with Vancouver when he first got there 2 weeks before the beginning of the season to at the end where becoming a part of this team, and we'll see in the future what Shea has in store for the Whitecaps. Toronto FC, the champions. Most improved. Let me guess, Duane. You will go with Raheem Edwards. No?
No,
Oh.
he only played half the year, really. Raheem Edwards was a great story for the first half of the season, and he would be someone that would be in a conversation for sure. But the player that I went to for TFC is Marky Delgado. Marky Delgado went from like a good player to a key player on that team, and then we saw him, play in the MLS Cup final, and along with Azario, those two were able to change the way that TFC looked in such a way that allowed them to dominate that game. And there were many games this year that Delgado came in and was just absolutely vital to TFC's success. And he, again, as I said, you go back a year or so ago, and if someone had said, well, you got to give up Delgado, and TFC fans would go, that sucks, but they'd be okay with it. Now, if someone said you got to give up Delgado, they'd, oh my God, how are we going to replace Delgado? Sure. He is that important to this team. He's a glue piece out there. He's never going to be a superstar in a team like that, but an absolute vital, consistent starter for the best team in Major League Soccer, and for that, I have to give him the nod as the most improved player for this season.
Now let's move to league-wide. MLS in general, most improved players according to Duane.
We talked about Hamel a minute ago, and I think that's a good choice there too. Delgado would be in that conversation as well. I hate to repeat players, but certainly, in many ways, if you look league-wide, this is, I've heard other people actually put Delgado as the most improved player league-wide. So I don't know who's to argue with them. I'm going to go with that because he is, again, a guy that's gone from just kind of, a guy that was at Chivas USA that is now a key component to the best team in the league. So for that, I'm going to put the nod to Delgado.
I think I'm going to use Jackson as well, but I'm going to, for league-wide, is not just league-wide, I'm going to use it for Canada too. So it's a trifecta. It's a Jackson ML trifecta for me because a player that was not in the plans of Zambrano whatsoever, not in the plans of Floro before, or the interim coach, I forget his name right now, but he wasn't in plans of the Canadian men's national team. Anthony Jackson ML never really was part of the process before, but because of performance, had to be included, and he performed well. And now he's almost a pendant striker for the U.S. for the men's national team because of his play. So Jackson ML for me. U.S. men's national team, Duane, most improved. Is there a worthy candidate for most improved?
Yeah, it's Pulisic because he's improving from like excellent to very excellent to elite, right? Like he is across the board the player that is most jumped out and most deserving of praise across the board for the U.S. men's national team here. So even though he's probably going to get named again in a minute, but I'm going to name him as the most improved as well.
Most underrated. We'll continue the order that we started. I'll go with Montreal, and the player for me that's the most underrated is Cal Fisher. This little short, blonded-haired center back that came out of nowhere 2 years ago and played in the Super Draft and played well for Montreal last year, and this year played well as well. When he wasn't injured, he really almost made Laurent Simon expendable by his play. Yes, there's a reason behind the trade of Laurent Simon to LAFC, and one of the reasons probably to take control of that locker room when you trade a lot of their influential parts. But Cal Fisher, for me, his attitude is not do too much, not overstress, not overstep your boundaries as a center back, to just do what you're asked to, and leave the mentality of the coaching to the coaching staff. And you're not going to anticipate everything. You just do what you need to. You trust your teammates, but you trust what you need to do too. Cal Fisher is reliable. Cal Fisher, for me, is a very underrated defender in Major League Soccer and in Montreal. And he has been one of my revelations over the last few years. Cal Fisher, most underrated for Montreal in my mind.
I'm going to defer to you, obviously, to Montreal when it comes to a category like underrated. But I would mention Daniel Lovitz might be a little bit underrated, too, in terms of his contribution this year. That would be the other player that I would name there.
He's not the defender of the year. Fine, even though he was named defender of the year for the Montreal Impact. But I think because he was the only one that was consistent enough to be named at that point. But yes, you're right. I would put Daniel Lovitz in my second position. And it's a shame, but it's two defenders, and there's one position that really we shouldn't name as most underrated with Montreal is defenders because they struggle all year long. But here we go. Ixiquo,
All right.
Fisher, and Lovitz for most underrated player. But every time I talk about Daniel Lovitz, I have like bad and terrible movies coming into my mind because I think of John. So that's why.
I think love it's in the air.
That's an amazing one. Lovitz in the
Love
air.
it.
Come on,
Yeah,
Ultras,
he's got a
1642.
one-headed goal.
You gotta sing that song. If he scores, you gotta sing "Lovitz in the Air." Come on.
There you go. All right. So Vancouver, Yordi Reyna is my pick for most underrated player for the Whitecaps, and I think he's a player that consistently doesn't really get mentioned a lot. That it's consistent. That's the word there. He's always out there. He's a solid performer. He's a guy that doesn't get talked about a lot. That's just a solid guy. So Reyna is my pick for the Whitecaps underrated player of the year.
Most underrated for Toronto FC.
Stephen Beitashour.
Oh,
We talk a lot about Justin Morrow on the other side. Those fullbacks are so key to what TFC did for so long in that season, and are absolutely the most important aspect in my mind to why they won the Supporters' Shield so dominatingly. And we talk, as I said, a lot about Morrow, and certainly his goal scoring this year has made him jump out. He was, a legitimate contender for Defender of the Year, which is remarkable for a fullback to be in that conversation. But the other side of it, and the sort of the stability around the other side with Beitashour, and he's still a player that they need to sign for next year, and that's probably the most pressing thing right now for TFC is to get Beitashour back in the books. He to me is their most underrated player on that club again. And I could have put Delgado in there as well, but I think we sort of spoke a little bit about Delgado a minute ago. And even Jonathan Osorio, when he played well, could be in that conversation. Osorio has had a funny season. You can almost put him into the three categories that we've already named. He was almost the most disappointing at times, but at times he was the most improved, and at times he was the most underrated. So it depended really on what side of the bed Jonathan woke up on, which is why he's not going to win any of these things, but certainly he'd be in there. But the Beitashour is my pick.
yeah, and let's not forget how far he came from this year. Stephen Beitashour almost, was it ruptured? Did his spleen ruptured with that contact with Callum Malice in the spring?
Yeah, no, he certainly was in bad shape. They said that saying it was his life was at risk is a bit dramatic, but I think that his playing career was at risk at times in the immediate aftermath of that injury, and he managed to overcome it. So certainly there's a lot to really like about Stephen Beitashour's season, and he's again a player that really doesn't get talked about a lot.
He almost scored a goal for the first time, so that was close.
Yeah, again, you're talking about a consistent starter for the best team in the league that doesn't get talked about. So certainly, he's, I don't know, argue with me, TFC fans out there, but I have trouble thinking of a better choice for that one in my mind.
Now, moving on to Canada, the Canadian men's national team, the most underrated player for the men's national team in 2017. That one, I had difficulty singling one player out of this because it's such a weird year for Canada in 2017 where we had the Gold Cup. It was the B Gold Cup. We had a good performance. We had great players. I can't consider Davies underrated because he's one of the few players under magnifying glass when he plays for Canada. So he's not underrated. Who do you have as underrated, Duane?
Boria, the keeper.
Interesting, yeah.
He does actually get a lot of attention here, so it's a bit of a strange one, as you say. And Davies would be an interesting choice as well, but he might be overrated at this point in time based on his age and his performance there. And that's it seems harsh to say that, but no, I think Dorian plays a really key role in stabilizing that team. Stepped in, I believe, to the role that Atiba normally would. And that Jonathan de Guzman did, or sorry, Jonathan de Guzman, there's a Freudian, like Julian de Guzman had done before his retirement. And I think Boyan is a key player. And he loves to play too. And he's a guy that doesn't have huge roots to Canada. He's one of those kind of peripheral Canadians, but he's really embraced it over here. A guy that really is great with the fans and great with sort of always being available in the media opportunities and things like that. And I think for those kind of reasons that are a bit behind the scenes too, that he's worthwhile for talking about underrated here.
No, of course. It's a good choice. It's a good choice. Now, the U.S. men's national team, most underrated player for 2017. Yeah.
Josie Altidore.
Josie as underrated. Explain.
Because the fan base craps on him constantly, even though he scored a hat trick the game before they talked about he supposedly, destroyed the United States and all that it's it means single-handedly. Forget Trump, it's Josie. According to the U.S. men's national team fans.
Forget the Don. It's the Joes. The Joes. It's his fault.
Yeah. No, I think if you look at Altidore's production across the board, there had been some misses down the line. Every striker does, and obviously they were all disappointed against Trinidad and Tobago. But you look at his overall production, and he's right up there amongst the best that have ever played and put that shirt on. And he does not get any respect at all from his fan base, which you can tell by how I'm saying this. Kind of makes me a little angry because I don't understand it. But I'm not American, so don't have the same frustration as them. But yeah,
I'm not saying it has anything to do with it, but there's other reason in sports sometimes why people are not loved. And this has nothing to do with Josie himself, nothing to do with how he is, how he plays, how he talks, or whatever. Sometimes people just don't like people, and it's because they're stuck in the 50s.
Sure, that might play a role for sure. You look at Josie has sort of embraced his heel a little bit too, especially, that speech after the fact. But for the record, I don't think he was targeting that speech at the Impact. I think he was targeted at the whole league as a whole and his detractors as a whole.
Yeah, but Duane, as a true heel, he says it in a way that anybody can take it and feel directed by this comment, and actually it works, right? That's what a heel does. And he has a career in the WWE if he wants, and he's done this. He's big enough to do it too. So there you go. No, that was a brilliant speech, and I think Torontonians have really embraced him because of that heel aspect of it. We kind of love to be hated a little bit at this point in time, right? But no, from a U.S. national team thing, I think that the amount of production that Josie puts out there compared to the amount of flack that he gets does not make any sense. So he is my pick for underrated. Now let's move league-wide before we move to the MVPs of everything. In Major League Soccer, who's the most underrated player, in your opinion, right now, or this season, last season?
This past season, can I say Seba?
Yeah, you can. If Javenko can be considered underrated, sure.
Just in terms of the fact that he wasn't even remotely in the conversation for MVP. He was in that final list of 5, but there were a lot of people that were just completely dismissive, and there's a lot of people that are saying, he had a crap season. Look at his numbers. He broke a record for, free kick goals. His assists in the playoffs, he only scored the 1 playoff goal, but he set up the 2 biggest goals, the goal against Columbus, which put them into the final, which was a brilliant sort of hold-up play. The 5'2" guy held the ball up and backfilled it in for the goal.
True.
And
that pass on the Josie goal, of course, in the MLS Cup final.
So all of those things, obviously he's not underrated in any true sense, but in terms of him not being considered amongst the very, very, very best, amongst certain people out there, Seba didn't have a good season. No, that's a load of crap. Seba had a great season. So yeah, that's a bit of a cop-out answer, but this is TFC-centric. But TFC was, again, they won 3 championships this year, so they're going to be the conversation here.
I chose a underrated player as well. It's similar to yours, but it might be the actual underrated player of TFC, league-wide as well. The only reason why he's underrated is because there's people paid a lot more than him that has a little tag on them that says DP. He doesn't, but he's as valuable, if not more, than those DP, and we've seen his contribution in 2017 for Toronto FC. Former FC Barcelona player Victor Vasquez, who said that he had the best year of his life in and outside the pitch, for me, is the most underrated player in Major League Soccer because he could be a designated player in any team in this league.
Yeah, no, and Vasquez would have been in the conversation as well, too. In fact, Vasquez is one of those weird players that is almost in the conversation for every award that you can think of, too. And maybe his game sort of doesn't lend itself to winning any of them, but he's a key glue forward. He could have been the most underrated player for TFC. He could have been not most improved, but he's absolutely a vital player. He could be the MVP for TFC, which is going to be an interesting conversation in a minute. But for sure, Vasquez could be part of that as well.
And we're finishing our last show of 2017 with our most valuable player per team and per national team. We'll go through the categories like we just did. For me, Duane from Montreal, there's only one choice possible. And we've seen this. You remember that conversation about money that Piatti had in a locker room and the little movement with the ear to the crowd, say, I'm listening, sign that check. Whenever that was happening, you can tell how important Piatti was because he was scoring whenever he wanted. Piatti does what he wants on the pitch, usually. And he is the best player Montreal has right now. He's the best player Montreal has ever had in the past. And he is the most valuable player and the best at the same time. Sometimes those things are equal and sometimes they're not. But when Piatti was not there, there was no party in Montreal. And when Piatti was there, at least there was a possibility of a win or a party, depending on your perception. But for me, it's Piatti, Duane. No other choices. Piatti MVP Montreal.
I think of all of the awards that we're giving out today, this is the most obvious one. And in fact, I did a fan one. I'll give the fan choice as well. I let them vote. That sounds like I'm some omnipro. Anyway, the fans voted on my Twitter.
You let them vote.
I allowed them to vote. And Piatti had 79% of the vote. Zmali was second with 17%. Evan Bush 1%, and other 3%. I don't know what the other was because even though when I say other name, that means you're supposed to tell me.
You're supposed to say it. You just don't you don't vote there. You have to say it. You have to comment. Come on, people.
Anyway, yeah, and I had just some trouble. The Montreal season could be summed up in the fact that I had trouble finding that third place. It could have been Hamel again, but
most improved. If it wasn't for Jackson, I was like, yeah, there's none. Nobody did. I had a lot for disappointing. I had Adjuro. I had a bunch below Mancosu too.
Exactly. But, for MVP, there was really only one choice, and it was Piatti. There's no debate on here. He could have been in that most underrated player in the league, too, for the same reasons I sort of talked about Seb. Everyone understands he's good, but he doesn't get talked about in amongst the very, very best, and he probably should be. I could make the same conversation I had about Javinko a minute ago. I could have had about Piatti. Piatti's the obvious choice here, and there's really no debate to be had.
Now, the Vancouver Whitecaps' most valuable player.
Kendall Watson.
Oh, good choice.
Yeah, I think that he's a guy that he had some game. He has some adventures sometimes, Watson does, but his overall game, like Simon in many ways, they're similar players in terms of that kind of play on the edge sort of aspect. But I think that Watson, top to bottom, start to finish this year, was clearly Vancouver's best player, and that's probably why they finished where they were. That a player that plays a role that he does is going to be their best player. They need someone who can that could be a game breaker, and then have that solid spine there with Watson if they're going to take that next step. But Kendall Watson to me. And that's, I believe. Let me just look at the fan vote here. The listener vote, and Watson, did win this as well with 52%. Montero had 28%. Chichero had 15%, and other was 5% with the listener vote. So, the listeners agree with me, but Kendall Watson is my pick.
Yeah, no, it's probably a good choice as well. Kendall Watson, I would take him in my club any day just because of his skill set and how he can be useful, and his size and his presence, and how he scares the bejesus out of people when he plays soccer. And that is an intangible that sometimes is useful.
Precisely.
Now,
all right,
let's move to TFC MVP.
Drum roll, please. No, I'm gonna.
Okay.
There's a lot of choices here. Obviously, we talked a little bit. But quickly before we do this, I realized that we didn't say they're most underrated league wide, and I just quickly, Graham Zusi is who I picked for there. I think he's a guy, again, that doesn't get the attention that he deserves league-wide. And actually, we did. I said Seba. Never mind. Graham Zusi is the guy that I actually had written down.
True.
Seba just came to mind. So there you go.
Well, Zusi was not underrated, but it was rated properly, if that is the expression, a few years ago. Remember when Kansas City was really hot in 2014 with Peter Vermees, and still Peter Vermees, I know, but in 2013, 2014, when Kansas City had that run and won the cup, Zusi was one of the best players in the league. And now, because of where MLS is going and all the new DPs and all the new players with TAM, Zusi has been not forgotten, but not as talked about enough. So I kind of agree with you there.
There you go. All right.
TFC MVP now.
We have TFC's MVP is Michael Bradley.
All right. Captain Bradley and Captain Canada.
They proved this throughout the season that they could replace almost any player on that roster, including Javinko, including Vasquez, including Morrow, including Beitashour, including all of them. But there was one player that really was consistent start to finish, was the dominant player that should have been the MVP of the final, and that is Michael Bradley. And his leadership, his glue, his ability to feed and create space for the game breakers on TFC. That is the one player that if that club lost for any length of period, that you would say, okay, now they're in trouble. So when you're talking about the most valuable player to his team, not the most outstanding player, not the best player, to me, it's got to be Michael Bradley. And in fact, the voters, the listeners did agree with me. 51% picked Bradley, 25% Josie, 11% Seba, and 13% other.
Which is Vasquez.
Most of the others were Vasquez. Yeah. So,
this one's easy.
Yeah, and so that's pretty much what they were going there. But Michael Bradley is my pick there, Kevin.
Yeah.
I did know that we did actually miss it. So we're done this. We forgot to do our world player stuff. So we'll wrap that up quickly after we do this. But what would you say for TFC?
For TFC, well, I agree with you. For TFC, it is Michael Bradley, the MVP, just because of everything that happened surrounding the club. It wasn't a single dominating performance by one player like in 2015 in regular season in Jovinko that made the results. It's a combination of all those aspects. And who was captaining the ship? It was Bradley. Who was the player yelling at people, but go back to your place, go there, directing people? It was Bradley. So I agree with you there. MVP for Toronto is Michael Bradley. You take him out, and I don't think it's for sure that you win the MLS Cup. So there's that. But let's move to Canada. And my MVP for Canada in 2017 is based solely on the Gold Cup, because that was the biggest tournament Canada participated in 2017, the national team. And Alphonso Davies is my most valuable player for Canada in 2017. Best scorer, golden boot of the Gold Cup, our Euro, our Copa America, like the biggest tournament in this continent. A 16-year-old at that point won the Golden Boot, and for that reason alone, he's my MVP.
Just like the Euro.
Just like the Euro. It's the same.
In the sense that it's a Confederation Championship, yeah.
Yes, that was the small asterisk at the bottom of the page.
Yes, it is the same thing,
Prince.
only not. But no, look, yeah, it's not a bad choice, obviously, based on what he did there. But I went a little differently with the MVP, and I went with Scott Arfield, who to me was, and if you go back to listen to our show where we wrapped up the Gold Cup, he was my candidate's pick for MVP then as well. I thought that his play stepped up, his leadership stepped up. He played a different role than he does for Burnley, and was able to sort of, similar to what Atiba did over the years, where he played
just a little higher, just a bit more offensive with the national team. Yeah.
And speaking of Arfield, if I don't know if people watched him with that Burnley's upset of, they upset in terms of a draw against United. Arfield was friggin' everywhere in that second half and sort of played a key glue role there, which proves that he's a good player, and we're very happy to have him here in Canada. But Scott Arfield was my pick for MVP for the Canadian team this year.
It's a shame we don't have the budget to be able to send like a barrel of maple syrup to Scott Arfield every year to thank him for choosing Canada, because it's that important for our national team that he chose to wear the maple leaf, because he's the best player we had and the best player we have in a long time, just because of where he plays and his skill set. No, you're right. Scott Arfield is a very good choice. Now, this one's going to be tough in a year where they did not make the World Cup. All right, that should be fair. Canada did not make the World Cup too, but it happened a long time ago. 2017 MVP for the U.S. men's national team.
Christian Pulisic. There's no choice.
Is there any other choice?
Yeah, he's their best player. He's their most valuable player. He's their key to their future. That's as much of a. I said Piatti was the easiest choice here. It's a tie.
Pulisic, yeah.
This is 1A and 1B.
And for MLS, the MVP, reigning MVP.
Again, most valuable to his team. Look, obviously Valeri won the MVP league-wide, and that is a good choice. You could make that choice pretty easily in this, but I went Michael Bradley again, and I'm using the whole year, including the playoffs, when I do this, and he just was the most consistent player playing an underrated, under-heralded role from the get-go. And look, yeah, I'm being TFC centric, but if I'm ever allowed, this is what went.
Fine,
right?
It's the year.
And Michael Bradley's my pick.
This year you're allowed. Only this year. One of the teams I don't want us to forget about with the season they had is Atlanta. And I think Josef Martinez in Atlanta have something to say as MVP in the entire league because of what he brought to Atlanta. What Atlanta did this year in in the playoff, they got maybe a little surprise there. But they still got to that point. Better and easier at least than we thought they would. And the amount of points they did for their first regular season in Major League Soccer was very impressive. And I think the combination of Almiron and Josef Martinez, for me, are a good MVP choice as well, league-wide.
Yeah, for sure. And we did, ignore Atlanta for that. Real quick, Kevin, to wrap this up, let me just lead the way with a few rapid fire. We didn't prepare these, but I'll just get your sort of initial thoughts on that. So you talked about Atlanta. So this is what sort of triggered my mind here, and I want to get into the world stuff too before we end. Are they the best story in MLS this year? What was the best story in Major League Soccer in your mind, just off the top of your head?
Best story in Major League Soccer. Expansion maybe was a big story in 2017. The new expansion teams and the expansion process for next year could be that, but Atlanta, as a sport-related story, I have to say it was one of the best results there this year. The way that they played and consistently were able to surpass the expectations of failing that we thought they would. They never hit the wall, right? We were all waiting for, when is the wall coming? Because you're an expansion team. You can't be that deep. You can't be that good. Of course not. You're an expansion team. But that wall never came. So, yeah, it's a great story.
And I agree. Obviously, I don't want to be TFC-centric anymore. I mean, they were a good story for sure.
Enough.
In terms of the most surprising story, the most surprising development, I'll ask you that, and I have an answer in the back of my head. So if you just think up quickly off the top of your head, what the most surprising thing about what MLS in 2017 was?
Ooh, it's the most surprising. Columbus saved the crew. Columbus going to Austin, maybe?
Yeah, or the success of the crew. I did actually pick them pretty high up when I in the preseason if you listen back. But yeah, that is kind of one of the most disappointing development of this year. I think for sure that is. But I'm going to go similar but different. My most surprising development of 2017 was Nashville. Was the emergence of Nashville to win that expansion bid. When the expansion process started, when we were talking about this a year ago, Nashville was like an afterthought.
Nashville was number 11 in January on my depth chart of the 12 expansion cities.
Yeah, and here we are. And it's not only have they captured the bid, it's like they were all like, we understand it now. It's like, yeah, that makes sense, and we're excited about it. So that's where I'd go there. All right, to end it, Kevin, we kind of bypassed the international sort of stuff. So just quickly, who would be your most improved international player? And this is a tough, big world, but
it's a lot of players. There's 20,000 players in the world, professional at top flight level. Most improved at the world level. Oof, that's a tough one. You would have to go with you go ahead first, and I'll think.
Okay, I'll give you a second because I kind of threw it at you. Yeah, I'm going to go Raheem Sterling. His improvement under Pep Guardiola has been remarkable. He's almost scoring at the same pace as Harry Kane, and people don't really recognize that. He's scoring huge goals, late goals, to break things open for City, and has been such a key and massive component to their undefeated run in this league up to this point that I have to give him the nod there. And just like TFC, I'm going to be a little City-centric in these words too, but I think if any year I'm deserving of it, it's now.
I think I'm going to go with Cavani. Just because when Neymar got that transfer and that bunch of money, like 200 van truckloads of money, pulled it into his driveway, and he got himself a nice golden ticket to Paris, we're all expecting Neymar to run the show. But no, we should not have counted out Edison because, well, he did not just invent the light bulb. He did as well invent how to score beautiful goals for Paris. Edison Cavani.
All right.
What a great player. He's the most improved for me.
All right, so underrated. I'll go first again. Give you a second to think about it. I'm going to go City again here too. This is a player that maybe this is more of a lifetime achievement underrated award too that I'm about to give, and I don't know whether you can figure out where I'm going to go by just talking about this, but I'm going to go with
Zavaleta,
the magician. No, it's not Pablo Zavaleta, who I love to this day, but he needs to retire now.
Yeah, he does.
It's David Silva. He's a player that has consistently been amongst, I believe, the top 10 in the world, and he doesn't really get the attention or the recognition beyond City fans for that. And I think this season he's really stepped up and become a massive part of arguably the best team in the world, or one of the top 3 or 4 anyway, and is just playing a key point. He's getting sort of the headlines that maybe he deserved a couple of years ago. So that's more of a lifetime achievement nod. True. But if I'm going to do a year, and my MVP is not going to be from City, by the way. But yeah, it's David Silva.
My most underrated player is a player that's not necessarily underrated, but what he has achieved by winning the league 2 years in a row with 2 different teams as a key piece of those teams that won the Champions League, the Premier League. Well, N'Golo Kante, one of the best midfielders in the entire world. But he's so quiet, he's so shy, he's so like a nice guy and does his own thing. Doesn't have a big presence on social media, so you don't think about him all the time. But when you watch him play, you understand everything that needs to be understood about N'Golo Kante and why he was one of the biggest reason, if not the biggest reason, why Leicester won the league 2 years ago and why Chelsea won the league last year.
Fair enough. All right. The most valuable player to his team in world football. This is different than the most outstanding player or the best player in the world, which is, we know it's going to be one or two names if we say that. For the record, I would pick, well, that's a tough one because you kind of have to look at the year as opposed to the season. And if I was picking the season, I'd pick Messi, but if I'm picking the year, I'd pick Ronaldo. But we're going to sort of maybe I'm going to pick them anyway, but we're talking about most valuables to his team. So I'm going to go slightly different there.
Yeah, Messi.
I'm going to go with Harry Kane.
Harry Kane scored the most amount of goals ever in the Premier League in one season. Well, in 1 year, in the calendar year.
Yes, and if you take him off Spurs, where are they? You take Messi off Barcelona, they're not as good, but they still have Suarez.
Can you imagine taking out Harry Kane of the Spurs lineup right now? Like, they'll be in relegation. They'll be like down the table.
Yeah, exactly. They're not where they are. They're struggling much more, and they're certainly they're not the Champions League Final 16 without him as well. So when I'm talking about MVP, most valuable to his team, I'm going to take Kane there for sure. Yeah. And that's going to be, he's going to be a very interesting team to watch for, or interesting player to watch in 2018 to see where he ends up, whether Spurs can keep him around, whether what he can do for England. There's going to be a lot of storylines around Kane this year, and he's going to be a very interesting player. And he's my MVP, again, not most outstanding, not best, but MVP of world football in 2017.
To his team. We want to take a second to thank every single one of you for listening to us in 2017. Millions of listens, hundreds of thousands of downloads, tens of thousands of views on videos, and so on and so forth. Thank you for your contribution, for talking to us on social media, for following us, for liking our shows, for spreading the word, for spreading the good news of soccer today to your fellow soccer fans. We thank you for this in the past year, and we're going to ask you again for your help in 2018 in spreading the good news of this beautiful game every day, 10 a.m., Monday to Friday, during the next year as well. We're going to take a few days off in the beginning of the week. We'll come back probably, Wednesday on the 3rd next week, Duane?
Maybe, yeah, sure. We'll take the second off, yeah. Do that, and we'll come back. We're going to, as I said, do a D2 review and a women's review next week as well, with guests on there to help us along, because Kevin and I watch a lot of that stuff. Kevin, I think, watches a bit more D2 than I do, and I watch a bit more women's than he does, but we get it done. But we need some experts to help us out to do that, and we'll do that next week.
Exactly. And as always, for Duane Rollins, I am Kevin Laramee. We wish you and yours a great 2018. Health is all you need, because if you got health, you can do whatever you want. And until then, as always, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.